And welcome back to the show. Make the Road New York is one of the largest progressive grassroots immigrant led organizations in New York State. The organization actually tackles the issue of workers' rights, as well as immigrant and civil rights, environmental, as well as housing justice. And Make the Road is also dealing with organizing and building leadership of community members who are eager to fight for housing equality as also environmental justice. And here to share a little bit more about the great work that they do with boots on the ground on this matter, I'm joined by the lead organizer, I should say, for Make the Road New York, Ms. Jennifer Hernandez. And Jennifer, good to have you.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to share some of the work that Make the Road is doing, especially
Yeah,
during
I
this
think it's
hard time.
important. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think it's important. I think you guys are doing great work during this time. And as we talk about New York City and all of the people who've been affected by COVID-19, I know the immigrant population is huge in that number. So just walk us a little bit about through some of the challenges that you're finding the immigrant community has post COVID-19.
Well, as we know, right, we're not in a post-COVID-19 world yet. But yeah, for sure, the immigrant community, especially right, the undocumented community in New York, has been one of the hardest hit due to this pandemic. Largely, of course, due to the status, right, and the sort of resources that the immigrant undocumented community can access or cannot access, to better say that. So as you mentioned, right, we have over 24,000 members, and at the beginning of the pandemic, we really saw that there was just a lot of destruction in the community. So for undocumented folks, right, that have lost their jobs, they don't have sort of a safety net, right, of unemployment payments. They don't have, they weren't able to get the stimulus check, right? So for a lot of our folks and a lot of our membership, they have literally had a zero income during this pandemic. And while some of them are starting to go back to work, they're in debt, right? Some of them are still getting better from COVID. We actually had lost over 80 members to COVID, and so it's been uh, just a really difficult time. And at Make the Road, we've sort of reshifted our priorities to be able to tackle issues that we see and to make sure that legislation is passed so that our community can actually survive this.
Yeah. Certainly, our prayers and condolences go out to you losing 80 members. I think New York City, it's hard to somebody who's in some way, shape, or form been affected by those who've actually lost loved ones during COVID-19. And so 80 is a huge number. Wanted to let you know that we're definitely thinking of you and praying for you. But let me just take you before COVID for a minute, because before COVID, you guys are doing some great work and still are doing some great work. A little bit about your organization and the work that you are doing in helping families of immigrants.
Yeah, so Make the Road, right, is a organization that builds the power of immigrants and working class folks to achieve dignity and justice. So even before COVID, as you said, yes, we've been working on multiple issues. We work on workers' rights, on housing rights, immigrant rights. We work on police accountability. And so part of our work is to make sure that the people that are directly affected are centered in this fight and are the ones leading this fight and deciding what bills we're pushing and what actions we're taking to make sure that our community is protected and that they have all that they need to be able to survive. And again, right, I think we see that disparities were already there, right, and a lot of injustices were already there, and COVID sort of, um, you know, really increased just visually how much we can see these injustices, but they were already there, right? And so we continue this fight, and we continue to hopefully advocate for a bunch of bills. But at the moment, we are focusing on three bills. Um, that include a funding of excluded workers. So, like again, I said, undocumented folks are not able to access unemployment benefits, right, due to immigrant status. They're also not able to access federal stimulus money. And so we are fighting for excluded workers fund, which would basically work sort of like unemployment fund for undocumented workers to be able to survive. Number two, we're working on pushing the cancel rent demand, right? We know that in New York City, especially, right, the rent prices were already outrageous, and a lot of folks already lacked a lot of protections as renters. And again, since a lot of folks have not had any sort of income, and this isn't only for undocumented folks, right? This is for general population. A lot of folks owe up to 4 months of rent at the moment. And we know that while the eviction moratorium that happened in New York State, that basically stopped any evictions was a good step. It wasn't a solution, right? People still owe that money and can still be sued to be evicted. So that's another one of our main goals, to cancel rent, and we have some bills that we're pushing for that. And then the third is to decarcerate prisons and jails and detention centers. We know that these places are conducive to the expansion of COVID, and people can't really take safety measures like they should. And so we're also pushing that demand. So we have 3 demands right now that we're pushing for, and our members are out there fighting every day to make sure that we survive this.
Yeah, let me walk back for a second and go back to when you talk about rent and your fight for rent cancellation. A lot of people say rent cancellation is necessary. Looking in New York, rent prices are astronomically high, and trying to make it in New York City pre COVID was already a challenge for many. But with rent cancellation and your fight for rent cancellation, let's play it out in its worst case scenario. If you don't get rent cancellation, how does that impact those who are in the immigrant community and those people that you serve if there is no rent cancellation?
Yeah, and so one of the things that, of course, we've been saying for a long time, right, as housing organizers, is that if we don't find a solution to help folks pay their rent or to cancel rent, that there's going to be a big wave of evictions that will start as soon as the moratorium is lifted, right? And so we began to see that the lifting of various parts of the eviction moratorium. So as of right now, up until August 5th, no cases are sort of moving forward. But after that, we know that we will start to see a big wave of evictions if we don't get to a solution. I think especially for undocumented folks, there's a lot of fear of retaliation, right, when it comes to immigration status. And again, there's a lot of lack to access to various sort of programs that help you financially. And so it is extremely hard, right? So the only way that we can get to a place um, where everybody is safe and everybody has a chance to fight and stay in their homes is through a universal cancellation of rent, which is what we're pushing. Because again, right, people, we're all, like you mentioned, we're already living paycheck to paycheck in a lot of places in New York City. And so to think that people are gonna magically have 4 months worth of back rent to pay at the end of this pandemic, when job security is not necessarily there, when the economy is not doing well, that's just absurd.
Yeah. And I want to share a little bit more talking about housing for a moment, because when we talk about housing, you got the rent situation, but then you also have the living situation. And when we talk about living, talking about living conditions, and sometimes many are forced to have to live in uh, hazardous conditions, to say,
Mhm.
put it bluntly, a lot of hazardous conditions.
Yeah.
What are you finding by way of immigrant housing? And I know that you've got a push for a cleaner and a more greener New York as well.
Yeah. So again, right, for undocumented families, especially for immigrant, for low wage workers, a lot of the times, right, people have to double up in apartments, right? There's a full family that's living in one bedroom, right? If you have 2, 3 bedrooms, like there's a family in each of the bedrooms, right? Because that's the only way you can actually afford an apartment. And so that, of course, didn't help, and does not continue to help in terms of being safe and exercising in social distance. So we saw a lot of that, especially during the spike, right? A lot of people that couldn't necessarily self isolate, right? If you have roommates. Um, A lot of folks that again live in maybe illegal units, right, basements, attics, right, because they can't, that's all they can afford, which again don't help with something like COVID, right, that is very respiratory. um, and yeah, we continue to push for legislation, right, that makes housing greener, that makes sure that people have affordable housing and a place with dignity, where they can have their families and not sort of be afraid of being left out in the street and of not having enough room or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to, if you take a moment for and allow our viewers to get a little bit of your perspective on what environmental justice looks like and sounds like. When we talk about social justice, many people have always affirmed it to just be police brutality and the issues of police and criminal justice. But we know that social justice is far more than that. It deals with housing. It also deals with environmental justice. So for somebody who's watching right now, wants to know a little bit more about how do you define environmental justice and how it affects you, what would you tell people?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially during these last years, right, for the immigrant community and for low wage workers, right, we've seen that there's a big shift in sort of immigration, right, of people that are coming from countries that have been devastated, right, in terms of climate, right, where you have climate disasters and people have to migrate, or you have to migrate because um, large corporations have taken over, right, your homes and have destroyed your land and have trashed your land, right. And so we've seen a big shift in that, right, in terms of immigration and the connection, in terms of climate justice and immigration, right, that a lot of the times in recent years, right, like immigration is not just economic, right. Of course there's a certain part of it that's economic, but it's also due to the climate, right, and people that can't grow food anymore when they used to, right, uh, because of climate change, right, and excessive heat and lack of rain. Um, and so I think that, for example, when we talk about climate, we always talk about things that an individual can change, right? Recycling and all those things, right? But the truth is, right, that the large corporations are the ones that are at fault for a lot of these climate issues that we have, right? And they're not being held accountable. They're not being taxed. They're not being, prosecuted the way that they should, and are the real sort of the real villains in terms of like the climate crisis, right, but a lot of uh, and so one of the big aims for us at Make the Road New York is to start sort of having that education and sharing that education with our members, right, and thinking about how these corporations are responsible, and how, yes, we can also change, right, our behaviors, but how systematically, right, um, we're sort of turning the responsibility into the individual instead of like this systematic, um, you know way in which corporations avoid accountability, right, for this climate crisis.
Right. Walking people through getting to know their rights, because we do know in the immigrant community in a lot of places, and you don't necessarily have to be an immigrant. I think a lot of times you can just be an average New Yorker. You walk around and you just simply don't know your rights when it comes to this. But I know that your organization spends a lot of time in trying to educate people in knowing their rights. How do you go about letting people know what their rights are?
Hmm. And so pre-COVID, right, we would have committee meetings, right? One day a
Mhm.
week, each committee would hold sort of like a dinner space, and we would do Know Your Rights workshops. At the moment, we're actually having workshops and Know Your Rights sessions on Tuesdays and on Thursday evenings on Facebook Live, right? So because we have switched our mode. And so we're doing that. We're doing Know Your Rights in terms of immigration, right? What to do if immigration comes knocking at your door or at your workplace or whatever it is. What are your rights as a worker, right? Minimum wage, paid sick leave, all that kind of stuff. What are your rights as a tenant, right? If your rent stabilized, sort of what are your rights and how you can put complaints and make sure that your landlord is fixing up your place and all that.
Have you heard anything about ICE with regards since COVID-19 has been going on? A lot of people been isolated at home. Have you heard a lot of activity with ICE in terms of at least arrests? I know there can't be deportations because we are in the midst of COVID-19, but it's certainly on the port of arrests and infiltration. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so we actually have heard that there has been a start of arrests again in the last week or so. So we've heard that. We've also heard of people being transferred from detention center from one detention center to another, which usually means that detention centers are trying to make space for new arrests. So we have heard that. It's still sort of on the low range, it is starting up again, and so we have started again to conduct our Know Your Rights workshop and to make sure that we support families that come in contact with us.
Yeah, yeah. So before we go, people want to know more about your organization. How can they get in touch?
Yeah, so you can get in touch with us through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, but you can also we have 5 offices around New York. And so to find our phone numbers for each of those offices, you can go to maketheroadny.org. And our offices are one's in Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Long Island, and White Plains.
Well, Jennifer Hernandez, thank you so much for sharing with us here. Make the Road, a very important organization here in New York. Make the Road New York, doing great work with the immigrant community. Thank you for taking the time to share with us a little bit here on the Social Justice Forum. Thank you much.
Thank you.